If you look at the all ancient civilizations, India is more richer than any other civilization as far as the epigraphs or inscriptions are concerned. 73,000 and especially 70% of the inscriptions are found in only in South India. North was disturbed last 1000 or 1200, 1300 years. Therefore, many temples, many inscriptions have been lost. It's a biggest chronological problem in Indian history. It starts from the, we have to first establish the date of the Alexander also, because the during even Indo-Greek kings reigned in Afghanistan. So this chronological problem is generally we assume a date first AD as the sheet anchor of entire world chronology. So we there is an assumption in the entire world historians, I think the all academicians, they believe that first AD is the date of Jesus' birth. But there is no independently verifiable evidence to establish first AD as an historic epoch. I am not questioning historicity. The problem is the date of Hijra era, the epoch of Hijra or the date of Muhammad has been arrived with an assumption to that first AD is the Jesus birth. Today we will discuss about the Indian epigraphy. Epigraphy means it's the study of the inscriptions found in a particular region. So we will be discussing the all Indian inscriptions today. The problem is, yes, we have numerous times discussed there are chronological errors in Indian historical narrative. So first, chronology has to be corrected before studying the history as well as the epigraphy also. So I'm just going to present how these fallacies in Indian chronological narrative as well as the in epigraphical studies that led to numerous biases, and due to those biases, various concoctions and distortions have been taken place in the narrative of Indian history. How we can solve these problems? So let us start with the how the Indian epigraphy. So first, the earliest inscriptions, what we can say, there are certain undeciphered inscriptions like the Indus seals. So it is well known the Indus seals have been found between the Indus and Saraswati River region. So it starts from Pakistan, it may extend up to Afghanistan and up to Rajasthan area and entire Saraswati region. These Indus seals have been found. The script is many people have claimed that they could succeed in deciphering the Indus seals, but still there is a, because till we find a bilingual inscription, we cannot establish that yes, the Indus script has been deciphered. Now the deciphered inscriptions, how far we could decipher? So there are lithic inscriptions written on rocks and temples and all lithic inscriptions. Then we have some terracotta inscriptions. The terracotta figurines or certain terracotta made items have some inscriptions. Then we have a famous copper plate inscription. The kings have donated to Brahmanas or even learned people or even the worthy individuals. So those are copper plates. Then we have some metalware inscriptions, some kind of a metallic objects. We find the inscriptions. Then we have an inscriptions on coins. So this generally a study of numismatics. Actually, numismatics has the both ways, the epigraphy as well as the how the coins have been made and other things. But yes, epigraphy is also part of numismatics. Then we have some inscriptions found on wooden pillar or wooden slabs and others. And then finally some old manuscripts, because some manuscripts are very recent, so those are we can't say because have been written various times. But some very old manuscripts have been found, like Bakshali manuscript. This manuscript is written in Sharada script of the period of some 3rd century AD or even maybe older. And the Gilgit manuscripts, these have been found 100 years or 80, 90 years back. in a particular in Gilgit in Pakistan. These are the Buddhist manuscripts. So these all give a very good insights about the our epigraphy, and we can study the inscriptions. So before that, I'll just give you the largest inscriptions found, like in a Tirundalluru. This is in Tamil Nadu. This there is a temple. While excavations near to the temple, a copper plate has been found, which contains around 86 plates, and that copper plate was issued during the period of Rajaraja Chola, and very recent phone, hardly 10 years old. And this copper plate contains 3,442 lines, and almost weight is 150 kg. There is a Karandai Tamil in Sangam plates. This copper plate found in 1950, and it contains 57 plates. And this plate was issued in during the Rajaraja Chola. And the third largest inscription is the Tiruvalangadu copper plate. It contains 31 plates, and it was issued during the period of Rajaraja Chola. And it was found at least at 110 years or 115 years back, 1905. So these are the all these largest inscriptions found in Tamil Nadu. So this is the what I am giving. These all are copper plates. Then the total, how many inscriptions have been found in India? So there is a Archaeological Survey of India. Under Archaeological Survey of India, there is an office of Director Epigraphy in Mysore. So this Director Epigraphy office is the custodian of all inscriptions found in India. So as per their records, almost 73,000 inscriptions have been found till date, and they have a records maintained in that office. And out of 73,000, almost 26,000 inscriptions have been found from Tamil Nadu, and 12,000 in Karnataka, almost 10,000 in Andhra Pradesh, around 8,000 in Maharashtra. If you see, the ratio is almost 70 to 75% in South India, and 25% inscriptions have been found in the north, though the region was much bigger than the South India. And there are some inscriptions state archaeological departments are maintaining, roughly some to 20,000 or 25,000. So we can say that almost 1 lakh or 90 to 95,000 inscriptions have been found in India. Why we found many inscriptions in the South India and why we don't find in the North India? The reason is very simple. North was mostly disturbed with the invaders, and from last, I think, 1,000 years or even beyond. During that period, all have lost their own, because especially the copper plates are the grants to the individuals. Actually, though, are we can say that the land records. So now, since they lost their ownership, then that metal, whatever the copper plate, they may have sold those copper plates at some metallic price, whatever the price of that metal, because generally metal was a rare earth material during those days. So generally they have remelted those copper plates, it appears. So we find very less number of copper plates in the North India. South was mostly because there was hardly any Muslim rule in the or any colonial rule in South India during that Delhi Sultanate or Mughal period. So mostly, hardly maybe 60, 70 years that Bahmani kingdom and the Madurai Sultans for a short period, 50, 60 years. But South India was completely free of colonial rule or any Muslim rule because a strong Vijayanagara kingdom existed for many years, even before the Hoysalas and prior to the Chalukyas were ruling, Western Chalukyas. So this is the total our area of epigraphical study. So mostly, if we see that lithic and copper plate inscriptions, and the copper plates are grants mostly, and the lithic inscriptions are donations, like they have any person, either king or maybe a wealthy person who is visiting a temple. is donating to the temple authorities. So these are the donation records. And there are some lithic inscriptions which are actually eulogies of some great kings like Samudragupta's Prayaga Prashasti. And even there are many such Prashastis exist in probably in Gwalior Fort and others. And the records, what we find the information is the epoch of eras. Generally, the copper plates refers to either Vikramaditya era or Shaka era or Kalachuri Chedi era, Gupta era. So they refer to the various eras. Then they give the dates. Every copper plate, not every copper plate contains a date, but 60 to 70% inscriptions have a date. And in case it's a grant, the king is giving the genealogy of their dynasty. Then regnal period, because the genealogies and the regnal periods of the various kings have been given in certain inscriptions. Then we find very interesting information about the ancient places like cities and what were the names of those cities, and we will easily correlate whether that place exists today or not. So it's a very good interesting study to find out the geography and the place, a village, a city through the study of inscriptions. Then donor and donee names, every grant contains donor and donee names. And there are other historical information like Chalukya inscriptions refer that the Pulakeshin defeated Sriharsha. So such very useful and very important historical information is also is available in these inscriptions. Then all not all 10 or 15% of inscriptions probably have the astronomical references like the solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, even Sankranti, solstice, either winter solstice or summer solstice, or the reference of moon's position in a particular nakshatra, because that is the tithi, has been mentioned in various inscriptions. Apart from that, even the year, like Prabhava, Vibhava, we followed the 60-year cycle. So especially South Indian inscriptions often refer to the Prabhava, Vibhava, the Samvatsara, in which Samvatsara that copper plate was issued. And the position of it, in very few inscriptions, some planets have been mentioned as position of the planet. So we have the very good information of astronomical references, and we can date these copper plates using these references very accurately. So the Indian epigraphy is very much important to fix the absolute dates in the chronology. Archaeology can only give some rough dating by carbon dating or even some kind of other methodologies. They can maybe plus minus 200, 300 or 500 years. But when we are talking about the continuous civil chronology of a continuous civilization, we must have an absolute date of various kings and their descendants. So that we can establish using the inscriptions as well as the references in the literature. We can reconciling the both. That's why the study of literary sources and the study of epigraphic sources is very, very important for establishing the absolute chronology. Because Indian civilization is a very continuous civilization since Vedic era to till date. But we have a literature evidence from Vedic era to till date, but the epigraphic sources are available only from the post-Buddha period only. So there is no reason that before that why inscriptions not existed, that we will discuss why, what was the because there are numerous speculations that Indians have no knowledge of writing before Buddha. So these kind of nonsensical theories have been floated, but the real truth will be found from the study of the literary sources. Then another study using this inscription, there is a paleography. I hope the many people might have heard about paleography. It is actually a chronological study of the evolution of various scripts under this paleography. And this paleography can be a subject can be established based on the epigraphical studies. So how the modern historians assume? They have assumed that the Indus script just before 1500 BC. This is an assumption. Then they say Ashokan and Mauryan Brahmi and the Kharoshti was around 400 to 100 BC. The before that there is a big gap, 1500 BC to 1400 or 400 or 500 BC, almost 1000 years. There was no script. Then they say Kushana Brahmi and later Kharoshti. This was in use somewhere 100 to 300 AD. Then we have a Gupta Brahmi, 300 AD to 500 AD. Then they say that Siddha Matrika Brahmi. This actually we generally observe this script in the inscriptions of Sriharsha and some of the inscriptions closely dated around 500 to 700 AD. Then the Sharada script from the Brahmi and others, the Sharada script specially used in Pakistan and Kashmir. This was around 800 AD. And the Devanagari script evolved somewhere 900 to 1000 AD. This is the chronological evolution of various scripts as per the paleography established by the eminent historian. But you can see the paleography has an assumption of a chronology, because paleography generally people cite paleography as an evidence to reject the chronology. That is totally a fallacy. Why? Because the paleography itself is based on a particular chronology. If your chronology is wrong, then the scheme of the paleography would also be wrong. So first you have to correct the chronology to have a true paleography. Otherwise, if the chronology is false, then the paleography would also be a false. So since we are following a very erroneous chronology, that's why the paleography is also false. How we will before that we will let us understand the chronological problem in Indian history. What is the chronological problem? As per the tradition, the Mahabharata war took place somewhere in the 32nd century BC. Then thereafter, Buddha, he attained the nirvana around 1944 to 1860. His lifetime was 18 years, so we can fix his dating around 1864 BC. He attained nirvana in 19th century BC. Thereafter, Mahapadmananda, he reigned after 1500 years as per the Puranic references. Then Mauryas, then Shungas and others. Then we have a traditional dating of Adi Shankaracharya in the 6th century BC. So there is a, but what modern textbooks teach us, the Mahabharata war took place. They have no idea because they don't believe in Mahabharata itself. They say that probably it's a fiction or a historical fiction. I don't know, whatever it is, but they don't date it all. So now the Buddha has been dated around 483 BC, his nirvana date. Now there is a difference of around 1380 years. So there is a chronological gap because our entire tradition before arrival of the colonial historians, we followed the chronology. This is the chronology we followed. But what modern textbooks written during the colonial era, they teach us that the Buddha attained nirvana only in 483 BC. This is how there is a huge chronological error of 1380 years. Now, there is a Vikramaditya, as per the tradition. Varahamihira, Kalidasa were in the court of Vikramaditya. Now, the historians perplexed about the problem, how Varahamihira and Kalidasa, they refer to Shakaira. In case if they were living in the 1st century BC, then how they could refer the epoch of 78 AD. So naturally they have to be dated after 78 AD. So Varahamihira, Kalidasa can't be dated in 1st century BC. Therefore Vikramaditya was a mythical king. So this is their bias or a kind of a false assumption. And they date Kalidasa around 400 AD and Varahamihira even 100 years later. But the Kalidasa's Jyotirvidavarna clearly it means Kalidasa is saying that the Varahamira is the senior contemporary. So there is a very we can say that it's a totally a false narrative is being taught in the schools and colleges, and this Shakaira problem led to 660 years. So if we understand the chronology first, the what was the traditional and the correct chronology, then how we are going to solve the paleography. Now the paleography, the based on the epigraphic evidences, what we need to do, what is the truth? The Indus script has to be dated only before maximum 2500 BC only. We need to, because those are the terracotta based seals, or maybe I don't know whether any metallic objects found with the Indus script, but those cannot be dated. So it is just an assumption that the Indus script existed up to 1500 BC. We have to first correct the chronology. Once we correct, we have to correct the chronology of the Indus script also, because the Indus script has to be dated at least 1,000 years before Buddha. Then Ashokan and Mauryan Brahmi and the Kharoshti. Kharoshti script, we know the inscription of Shahabaz Gadi found in somewhere near to Pakistan, near to, between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So the Kharoshti script is well known. The Kharoshti and Brahmi, both scripts existed. And this is the timeline would be somewhere 2500 BC to 13,000 BC. This script was in vogue in India. Then the Kushana Brahmi and later Kharoshti, then the Gupta Brahmi, then the Siddhamatrika. As per my studies, Siddhamatrika and Gupta Brahmi has to be both are contemporary scripts. Siddhamatrika is nothing, a kind of a calligraphic writing. That's all. They used some kind of a calligraphy to write it, but it was the same Gupta Brahmi. There is not much difference. But historians, they said that no, Siddhamatrika has to be post-Gupta period. This is just a kind of a bias. And the Sharada script and the Devanagari script evolved around 300 AD. As per the chronological study, we will discuss how this chronological problem has to be solved to establish a true paleography. But what fallacy is being established? This, as we have discussed, the Indus script as 1500 BC. So this is how that 660-year chronological error and the chronological error between Gupta Brahmi and Siddhamatrika Brahmi, and the Ashokan, because the Mauryans have to be dated at least 1300 years before due to the error in dating of Buddha Nirvana. Now, what are the biases? Because now the false paleography, what lead to a certain biases. What is this bias? They say that Indians had no knowledge of writing before 600 BC. Because the up to Buddha as dated around 500, so they just give another 100 years and they say Indians had no knowledge of writing. They have any evidence? Since they say that no inscription has been found. If you have not found that the absence of an inscription does not indicate that you don't have any knowledge of the writing. We have enormous Sanskrit literature from Vedic era to till Buddha. During the Buddhist period, either Prakrit or Lokik Sanskrit were in vogue, where Vedas were written in Vedic Sanskrit. Vedic Sanskrit was much older than the Lokik Sanskrit. Then we have to see whether any knowledge writing, why the historians nurtured this bias that Indians don't have the knowledge, did not have the knowledge of writing before 600 BC. Why? Because they say only oral tradition existed. I don't know how this oral tradition existed, since they say that Vedas were called Shruti. So therefore we must say that time they had no knowledge of writing. They just used the oral tradition to transmit the knowledge to one generation to another generation. This is how they maintained such a you can say the enormous, I think at least some 500 to 600 texts. I don't know how they have written without any knowledge. Vedas have at least more than 10,000 mantras. And Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, and everything were written orally. This appears very, very nonsensical. Then no inscription can be dated before 300, because they say that whatever the Ashokan Brahmi, any inscription found in that Brahmi, everything they dated 300 BC. Now it is extremely difficult. A script may have existed at least 700 years or 1000 years. How we can say that every script, every inscription found in the Brahmi has to be dated around 300 BC? This is also kind of a bias. So what are the inconsistencies in this bias theory? That is the first. Indus people knew the writing. It is well known. So it means in India, the people whoever lived during the Indus people, they knew the writing. Now, what happened? Suddenly, the so-called Indian Aryan invaders, because as per the modern historians, some Aryans from Central Asia, they invaded. So they had no knowledge of writing, no problem. But those indigenous Indians, they had the knowledge of writing, or everybody died before Aryan invasion, nobody existing in India. So probably they can't say that. So some descendants of Indus people were living in India. So there was a literate society in India. A society knew the writing, but the invaders had no knowledge of writing. Okay. Then how these illiterate Aryans became the rulers of illiterate society? No problem. Okay, Akbar was also illiterate, so rulers. But he can't. Illiterate ruler can't make literate society illiterate. But it became how a Indian society which was literate, means the society knew the writing before 1500 BC. After Aryan invasion, the society suddenly turns into illiterate, means they lost the knowledge of writing for 1000 years. How they lost the conveniently lost the knowledge of writing, the historians can better explain it. Now, if Aryans were Central Asians, then how they were illiterates? Because the script was known to Central Asia. If you see the entire Babylon, many inscriptions have been found. Even Bogus Koi inscription is dated 1400, 1500, where the Vedic gods have been mentioned in those inscriptions, even Mitanni inscriptions. Egyptian script is much older than 3000 BC. Even Babylonian script or even Elamite script existed more than 2005, 3000 years, 3000 before Christ. And even Armenian inscription, Central Asia also. So it appears that only those invaded on India, they had no knowledge of the script. So I don't know how the Central Asians had no knowledge of the script where the script was existing. So actually, there are numerous inconsistencies in the biases saying that India had no knowledge of writing before 600 BC. Now, in case Indians had no knowledge, then how Indians suddenly invented a highly sophisticated Brahmi and Kharoshti script? Because two scripts existed around 300 to 400 BC, Ashokan inscriptions. Those are very highly, because they follow phonetic logic, and they use matras, and they have vowels and consonants. It's a highly sophisticated. So suddenly how Indians invented, if it had no history, no chronological evolution of these scripts? So it's highly illogical theories have been framed and being taught since last 200 years. So we need to fight these biases, because Indians had knowledge of script since Vedic era. How we can, we are just going to understand that. Before that, we must understand the chronological history of the Indic languages. What kind of a Indic languages? First, we can say that a kind of an Indic language, whatever we can say, a Sanskrit, a Proto-Sanskrit, that existed. This dating I am giving based on my book, that chronology of India from Manu to Mahabharata, where I have explained how astronomically we can date the Vedic era. So I'm not going into those details, because today the subject is Indian epigraphy. So Sanskrit, a Proto-Sanskrit existed, and from that a Vedic Sanskrit Actually, how Vedic Sanskrit, if you read the Rig Veda mantras, the Sanskrit is well structured based on the grammar. The Sanskrit grammar is actually kind of a syntax. If you just follow the computer languages, the language is okay, it derived from English, but it follows a syntax. If somebody says that initially the computer language was born, later syntax evolved, it's nonsensical, because syntax and computer language both have to evolve together, because these are artificially structured languages. Similarly, the Vedic Sanskrit and the Sanskrit language is actually artificially structured language using the grammar. Entire Sanskrit grammar follows the phonetic logic, as well as the Veda mantras follow very perfect logic of conjunctions, Sandhi Sutras. There is no violation of Sandhi Sutra. The logic of Sandhi Sutra, logic of conjunctions cannot be evolved without the knowledge of a phonetic script. So, if anybody says that the Vedas were called Shruti, why the Vedas were called Shruti? Because the Vedas were the sacred text. So, it was generally the tradition that the sacred text must be learnt by listening from the Guru. You can't mispronounce anything. If you are going to do due to, if you are learning yourself, you may commit certain mistake. Due to that, you may be violating the certain social order. Therefore, there was a tradition that you cannot read yourself, you must learn Vedas by listening from your Guru. This was the reason why Vedas were called Shruti, not the reason that we don't have the knowledge of writing. If Sanskrit language cannot be evolved without the knowledge of the script, because the Sanskrit grammar is the basic, because the syntax and the programming language must evolve together. Similarly, Vedic Sanskrit and Sanskrit grammar must. That's why initially Sanskrit grammar were limited to the word-to-word Padapatha. Later it became evolved. So that's why Lokik Sanskrit became much more sophisticated. Once Lokik Sanskrit has evolved the complete business logic, then the language remained the same since 7,000 years or 8. If you say since Ramayana era, Valmiki wrote the Ramayana in Lokik Sanskrit because he was the first Kavi who wrote Kavya in Lokik Sanskrit. That's why Valmiki is known as the Adi Kavi. So the Lokik Sanskrit is existing since Ramayana era, beyond Mahabharata era. Mahabharata was, as per our dating, around 32nd century BC. We may go back to another 2,500, 2,400 years before Mahabharata era. So we can say around 7,000 BC, the Vedic Sanskrit, the transition from Vedic Sanskrit to Lokik Sanskrit. But at the same time, as per the Tamil sources, Agastya, he was the person who is regarded as the father of Tamil language, and he wrote a Vyakarana, grammar text called Agastyan. And the same Agastya is writing the Suktas of Rig Veda. So that's why Tamil and Vedic Sanskrit were the sister languages of, when born to a same mother. But what is being taught today, the Tamil, there is a different South Indian family. I don't know, there is no South Indian family, North Indian family of languages. There was only one family of languages. And in that one family, Vedic Sanskrit and Tamil language were born in around 10,000 or 11,000 BC. So first, let us understand this chronological history of this Sanskrit. Sanskrit language was evolved around 10,000, almost 14,000 to 500 BC to 10,500 BC. Then there was a post-Vedic Sanskrit. There was a transition period between Vedic Sanskrit to Lokik Sanskrit, and Lokik Sanskrit was evolved after that. Because this the Sanskrit evolved the way the Sanskrit grammar evolved. It's not a naturally evolved language from Vedic Sanskrit to Lokik Sanskrit. The Sanskrit grammar, the way the many programs like Java has various versions. Why? Because the syntax has improved. So similarly, when the grammar evolved from the basics to the advanced stage, the Vedic Sanskrit became Lokik Sanskrit, and then this is the difference. So this, the linguistic evidence, then the how North Indian languages evolved, and that we can work out, and this is the how South Indian languages have been evolved. So based on this, now what we have to do, based on the literature and the epigraphical sources, we have to work out the true paleography. Though we don't have any inscription beyond the Buddha period, but we have a literature. That literature clearly indicates that some kind of a script existed from Rigvedic era to till Buddha period. Then how we can arrive at true paleography? Initially, because from Vedic era to even till modern days, only learned people knew the Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is not a natural language. It is an artificially structured and very scientifically evolved language. So Sanskrit has to be learned with grammar. Therefore, this was limited to only unlearned people. So so therefore, what happened? The Sanskrit can only be written in phonetic script. That's why phonetic script and the knowledge of Sanskrit language was limited to the learned people. So in a way, we can say that Sanskrit was the medium of education during the period of from Vedic era to even before the arrival of Britishers, or even the Sanskrit was the medium. That's why we had the pan-Indian language, if anything existed in India, that was only Sanskrit. So therefore, the proto-phonetic script certainly existed, because without that, the Vedic Sanskrit cannot be born. So then early Brahmi script, probably, because we call it Brahmi, because Brahma was the first person who, as per our tradition also, Brahma who invented the script. Then we some early, from that early Brahmi script only, that matured script of Brahmi and the Kharoshti, both scripts evolved. Kharoshti was written from the left to right, and the different way of writing, and the both have been certainly, both in scripts evolved much during the period somewhere 7000 to 3000 BC. Then the other, we can establish the paleography. But at the same time, the common people who had no knowledge of Sanskrit, but they were speaking other languages, because India was a multilingual society since Vedic era. So Sanskrit was spoken by the learned people, because because it was the medium of education, but they also had the knowledge of local languages. So common people spoke local languages. If we read the Bharatanatya Shastra that was written before Mahabharata, even Ramayana era, he refers to numerous languages. And probably a proto-logosyllabic script may have existed. We need to find an evidence in case there are many graffiti inscriptions have been found, but those are very few symbols. It's very difficult to establish those graffiti inscriptions into a particular script. Then Indus script was in use some 7000 to 3000 BC. I have I generally speculate probably the Indus script may be the may have inspired the evolution of Chinese script. So someone has to study the early Chinese script before Shang dynasty or Xia dynasty during that period. What kind of the symbols they have used, and study with the Indus script. We may find some insights into that one, because Indus script was almost a logosyllabic script. Then what happened after Mahabharata era? Once Saraswati river dried up, slowly Indian kings started enforcing that let us use the phonetic script entire India, because it required a particular for administration purpose they needed a one standard script. So this was the reason after Mahabharata it was felt that phonetic script, so they adopted Brahmi. This is the reason why we find a pan India use of Brahmi a script only after Mahabharata era. Then when entire India started using Brahmi script, then the local versions of script started evolving. This is the reason how many scripts have been evolved from that Brahmi. This is well known. So this is the true paleography what we need to establish, and then we should study the epigraphy. Now there is another fallacy has been taught to us. There is a Brahmi, there is a Tamil Brahmi, and both differ from each other. But first we need to understand the chronology only, because this is the Ashokan inscription. So they say it is the Ashokan Brahmi. Then this is the Mangalam inscription found in Tamil Nadu. It refers to Nedunjelian. Now the problem is the chronology. First you have to establish the Nedunjelian's dating. But if you see the Ka, it is the Ka, and with the Matra. If you see the Ka, the plus sign, it is the Ka. And if you see this also, this is similarly. So almost 90% is the same. What they say generally, this is the what they say. This Ma is written like this, but this is written in the Tamil Brahmi. Then they say this is the way the just without A. Then with Ma this is written. Then this is, if it is a Dirgha Ma, then they are writing A separately. This is the A, the Ma, and then again A. But this was the in one or two inscriptions, and later it is. But it is only a way of writing. It's not a different script of few characters. Rest all characters are the same. Just one or two characters are written differently. That does not mean that that entire script is totally different than the Ashokan Brahmi. So there was only one Brahmi script existed. The local variant started evolving. So this was the reason why Tamil Brahmi is actually the local variant of the original Brahmi being followed during those periods by all Indians. So that's why we should not separate that, like generally this is actually a divisive policy also to separate it, Tamil Brahmi from the Ashokan Brahmi. That's not correct. Why the Ashokan Brahmi is found almost similar to the entire India other than Tamil? Because Ashoka, he is actually he ordered to erect almost 80,000 pillars in all over India. So he selected some engravers who know the similar way of writing. So this is the reason why we find all Ashokan inscription in similar script. Even that is found in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. The script is not different. Only Tamil Brahmi differs. Why? Because Ashoka's the engravers are during that those the scribes selected by the Ashoka, they knew the one way of writing. They wrote all pillars in a similar way. Later, those pillars have been transported and installed. So that's why the Ashokan Brahmi is same all over India. And he did not conquer the Tamil Nadu because he himself referred that Tamil kings, the Chera, Chola, Pandyas have been referred in the rock edicts. Now there is another chronological blunder in the paleography, that is related to this Gupta Brahmi and Siddha Matrika script. In the Siddha Matrika script, according to them, because it is the Sriharsha period, Sriharsha has to be dated after 600 AD. So that's why they date Siddha Matrika after Gupta Brahmi. But actually, in the traditional chronology, the Sriharsha flourished in 457 BC, at least 100 years or 125 years before the establishment of the Gupta Empire. Then Guptas reigned around 335-89 BC. So if we study the inscription, this is the only ornamental writing of the same script. We cannot say that this has to be dated there. This is the reason why Sriharsha cannot be dated. This is the false argument. So we have to understand Siddha Matrika is not any special script. It's just an ornamental writing, a calligraphic way of writing of a Brahmi script. That's it. So So we need to follow the chronology to find out, because the paleography cannot be corrected if we follow a false chronology. Now I will establish another, because I have many times I told there were the two different Shaka eras, how the epigraphic evidence establishes the fact that there were two different Shaka. One ancient Shaka that commenced in 583 BC, later Shaka established by the Indian astronomers. The epoch of the later Shaka or Shakanta commenced in 78 AD. But since the modern historians consider that both Shakairas are the same, that's why what they do, they reject numerous inscriptions as forgeries. This is another fallacy as well as a bias in the epigraphists of modern era. They simply reject numerous inscriptions on the basis of that, since they could not explain those inscriptions in the chronology, they tag those inscriptions as a forgeries. So let us study whether those are forgeries or real authentic information. So this methodology, what they have found is just selective acceptance, selective rejection, because they are following a one scheme of chronology. They have no idea how they can correct the chronology. That's why what they do, they just reject the data. So they started rejecting the inscriptions. So they all rejected, or those inscriptions have been tagged are almost in hundreds. So we need to study whether these inscriptions are forgeries or actually the chronology is a forgery. We need to first correct the chronology to understand these inscriptions in a particular, in a true chronological order. So this is the 660-year era, and this I have already explained. There is a Kurtakoti copper plate. This has been dated in 530. So this can only be dated 9th May 53 BC. This is the reason, since such total solar eclipse did not occur in the 7th century, the historians rejected this copper plate as a forgery. What I have established, no, this copper plate is purely very much authentic if you date this copper plate in the 1st century BC, considering this Shaka-Shakanta difference. Then the Shakanta epoch is actually an astronomical epoch. Indian astronomers introduced because they needed an epoch for the better calculations. So they found on Chaitra Shukla Pratipada on 1st April 78 AD, when Sun, Moon and Jupiter were conjuncted in the 1st degree of Aries. So this was the reason why 1st April 78 AD was selected for an astronomical epoch. But not erroneously, they just referred this as a Shakanta initially. But since in South India, a particular era has become synonymous to the word Shaka. Even today, the Shaka means a Samvat in South Indian languages. So this was the reason they started referring to 78 AD also as a Shaka. So this led to a confusion after 1000 AD. So last 1000 years we started believing that there was only one Shaka that commenced in 78 AD. So we have to verify this postulate based on the epigraphic evidence. So there is an inscription of Hoysala king, is dated Shaka 2027. Now if you add 78 years to that, then 2105 means we have to wait another 95 years to get this inscription or see that Hoysala king, how an inscription has been dated 2027. Now the historians say there was probably a scribble error. That is not possible, because in a Kannada numerals, 1 is written like that, 2 is written like that. How a person can do an error to do this one? So even you make it 1027, you cannot explain the date of a Hoysala king. So these problems have to be addressed. So what they do, they simply change the date of this 2027 into some other date, and they establish that some scribble error in this. Actually, there was no scribble error. This inscription refers to a Hoysala king reigned around in the 15th century AD. There is another inscription of Vijayanagara, is dated in Shaka 1975. This is the Shaka Varusha 1975, Tarana Samvatsara. And now again, the epigraphists, they simply edit the date, and they say that this is not correct. It has to be somewhere 1, 2, or they simply middle with the inscription and do the changes whatever the way they want, and they establish the date of a this Veera Mallikarjuna, the Vijayanagara king. And there is another inscription which is dated in 1919 in 1997. I don't know which Hoysala king was ruling in Karnataka. As per my information, Devagowda or somebody may be ruling at that time. So then again, there is no explanation from the epigraphist or historian. They simply edit the date to suit their chronology. But these three inscriptions clearly established that there was an ancient epoch of Shakaira existed, but the epigraphists simply do certain forgeries to explain these inscriptions. As per, they say that this corresponds to only 1297 or 1290. I don't know how they have worked out the date, because what they say, instead of 1919, they are making it to 9 into 2. I don't know how this 9 in Kannada can be converted reverse order. Then there are many inscriptions have been found, like a Pimpalner grant of a Chalukya Satyashraya. It is dated in 310 Shaka. So this has been published in Indian Antiquary and rejected. And since it is written in Devanagari, so they say that this inscription is a forgery. Actually, this is dated in Shakanta. Then we can easily explain how this grant can be authentic. There at least 6 copper plates have been found. These copper plate refers to a Chalukya king Vinayaditya, but Shaka era given is cannot be explained. This Shaka dates given in the inscriptions are even earlier than the Pulacation or even the Kirtivarman. So this is the reason why the historians are perplexed, and then finally they say these are all forgeries. They're all 6 copper plates have been rejected as a forgery. Now, recently, a Pranaveshwara, near Pranaveshwara temple in Talagunda, 2 copper plates have been found. The one copper plate is dated in Shaka 1102, another is in 520 Shakanta. Now, they accept this copper plate as an authentic, but they reject this as a forgery. Why? Because the both refer to the same script, and there are cross references. And how 2 copper plates having the cross references, because this copper plate refers to certain details given in this copper plate, can be rejected as a forgery. If we correct, and this copper plate is to be calculated in the ancient Shaka, and if we calculate the date of this copper plate into Shakanta, then we can easily explain. So, and this copper plate refers to a solar eclipse, and that on Chaitra Amavasya can be easily established on 30th April 519 in CE, there was a solar eclipse. So the astronomical references given in this copper plates are also match the period or date given in this copper plate. It's only we need to understand the difference between 2 different Shakas. The epigraphists were following a particular scheme of chronology. They had no knowledge of the ancient Shaka. They thought only 78 AD is the Shaka. This is the reason why they reject this copper plate as a forgery. So this is the copper plate. What I am just indicating that he is referring to the similar boundaries of the land given in that the another copper plates issued in Shaka 1102. Then there are Maitraka dynasty. Maitrakas were the feudatories of Guptas. They reigned in Vallabhi in Gujarat. So they referred only Gupta Samvat. a Vallabhi grant of Dharasena Deva. A Dharasena is issuing a Vallabhi grant in Shaka 400. Now, it is very, very difficult to establish the date of Dharasena Deva because Maitrakas, we have found many copper plates of Maitrakas. So Dharasena Deva cannot be dated in 478 AD. And moreover, this copper plate is written in Devanagari script. So since it is written in Devanagari script, I just referred to here that Pimpalner copper plate. That Pimpalner copper plate is referring to Shaka 310 with 378 and written in Devanagari. So this is the very much evidence to establish in the 4th century BC, sorry, in 4th century AD, Devanagari script had been evolved. So this is how we have to establish the paleography if we correct the Shaka Shakanta difference based on the epigraphic evidence. So there is another copper plate of Jaikadeva dated in Vikrama 794. It is 737. So again, they failed to explain this copper plate in the chronology. So they rejected the entire this copper plate as a forgery. But it's not a forgery. There is a Ammanika grant written by Shantivarman. It refers to 232 Shaka. Now the problem is the Shantivarman of Kadamba dynasty establishing the date in the 4th century is a problem for the modern historians. So they generally rejected as it as a forgery because they cannot be accommodate Kadambas during this period. There is another grant of Bana kings reigned in Karnataka. His copper plate refers to 261. Then again, the historians rejected it as a spurious because the JF fleet, they say that since it refers to Vilambi and a weekday Monday, those can't be verified. Therefore, they rejected this grant as a spurious. And the Ganga dynasty, a famous dynasty, reigned in Talakkad, close to Mysore. And a particular inscription refers to a date of Shaka 25 as the first Ganga king. So establishing the Ganga king in Shaka 25 is a nightmare for the historians. So they rejected this inscription as a forgery. Then there are certain copper plates like Tanjore plates, Tagaduru plates, they refer to Shaka 169 because dating the Guptas in the early Shaka is a chronological problem. Therefore, they rejected these all three grants as a spurious. Now let us move to the Vijayanagara kings. There are almost, I found 30 Vijayanagara inscriptions are dated before 1336 AD. Because modern historians teach us that the Vijayanagara was founded only in the 14th century AD and the date is around 1336 AD. But I got at least 30 inscriptions. These inscriptions refer to a date of Vijayanagara king before 1336. How? A particular inscription is referring to Shaka 1004. It means 1082. They are referring to a Vijayanagara king, Bukka Bhupati Raya. How a Bukka Bhupati Raya can be dated in 1082. So many kings, I can say these are all 30 I have listed. All are dated before. Only one last inscription, that 1339, but it is referring to Mallikarjuna Raya. How Mallikarjuna Raya can be dated just around the 1336. So there is a chronological error even in dating the Vijayanagara Empire. And another 42 Vijayanagara inscriptions are inconsistent with the chronology because though these inscriptions dated after 1336 AD, but they refer to the names of kings. Such king was not existed during that period. Like 1348 AD, a king Achyuta Devaraya was ruling in Vijayanagara. How? Because at that time only Harihara can only be dated. So these are all chronological errors in the almost 42. So I can say I gave all details in my book, that chronology of India from Mahabharata to medieval era. I have established that there is a chronological error even in dating of Vijayanagara. There is a copper plate. It is a very, very interesting copper plate found in Kudali Mutt. Kudali Mutt is and Sringeri Mutt, both are Shankaracharya Mathas, and Kudali generally claims they were the most ancient, but I can say that both are part of Sringeri, two branches in Sringeri. So this Kudali Mutt is dated 1073 Shaka. It means 1151 AD, in the 12th century, in the middle of 12th century. No Vijayanagara existed, no Vidyaranya existed, but this copper plate refers to, this is the copper plate, is published in the Epigraphia Karnataka. It refers to Vidyaranya, Vidyanagara, Vidyashankara. Even it refers to Sringeri Mutt. Even a treatise of Shankara Vijayam, the name of Mandana Mishra as a resident of Varanasi. Even the reigning Shankaracharya was Vijay Shankara Bharati of Vidyanagara. Vidyanagara, Vijayanagara, these both are the names of the same city. And the ruling king was the Kadamba king Purandara Raya. So now, Shaka 1151 CA, how we can date Vidyaranya and Vijayanagara. So Vijayanagara, Vidyanagara, Vidyaranya existed prior to 1151 CE based on this copper plate. So now the historians simply say it is a forgery. It means our revered Shankaracharyas have forged these copper plates. But we never ever objected to this kind of a foolish epigraphical studies. And I'll give you a literary evidence why Vijayanagara has to be dated at least 600. There is a chronal 600. What Firishta, he is mentioning King Krishna Raya around 1360 to 13 BC. As per the modern textbooks, Krishna Raya can't be dated in the 14th century at all. Now, he says that he had a kingdom of 700 years, means he was the successor of a kingdom which had a history of 700 years. How Vijayanagara had a 700 years history in the 14th century. And he quotes according to Siraj ut Tawari, no prince, because the Vijayanagara king, he replied to a Bahmani king, no prince before him ever so far reduced the Rajas of the Carnatic Vijayanagara, from whom he wrested much of the accumulated riches of 700 years. So even the Robert Sewell, he says that Firishta declares that they had existed a ruling family 7 and prior to 1350. What the person who translated the Firishta's book. So there is a problem. Even one Ekamranatha, he wrote a Prataparudra Charita of Kakatiyas, and in his book, he dates Vijayanagara kings around 600, 700 AD. And there is another grant. It is actually Orissa copper plate. It refers to a particular Arakeshwara who was ruling in Orissa in Kali Yuga 4 to 48. It means 1145 CE. But at that period, Anantavarman Chodaganga, he was the famous king of Orissa. He was ruling in the same Ganjam district. How the Arakeshwara as well as Chodaganga can rule the same area in the same period. And this copper plate is dated 24th regnal year. So we have to go back to 24 years. It means almost 1920 or 1121 AD. The Ganga king Arakeshwara was ruling in Ganjam district. So this is how we can solve the problem of this chronological error of 660 year. And similarly, I have established that there was the two different Vikrama eras. Kartikadi Vikrama era commenced in 719 BC, where the Chaitradi Vikrama era in 57 AD. So this is how the epigraphical studies solve the chronological problems to find out the epoch of eras. And based on that, we can counter all the fallacies and all false theories being propagated and concocted theories, and even we can counter the biases of the historians. So that's why the Indian epigraphy or epigraphical studies are very important to establish the true chronology of India apart from studying the literature. So now I stop here and I invite any questions if you have. Thank you.
So this is about the availability or lack thereof of inscriptions in India in general. So from my viewpoint, the number of inscriptions, epigraphs around 73,000 or 75,000.
Harun.
Does it not seem very little for a civilization of this much continuity and this much extent? This is one question.
Okay.
The other question is it not a distinct possibility that Indian civilization was also rather like the Incan civilization in that it did not use the written language much? Because you see, Ashoka among kings is rather the exception rather than the rule. Even Samudragupta doesn't have that many inscriptions. So, what is your opinion on these 2 points?
No, there is a, first of all, the if you look at the all ancient civilizations, India is more richer than any other civilization as far as the epigraphs or inscriptions are concerned. 73,000, and especially 70% of the inscriptions are found in only in South India. North was disturbed last 1,000 or 1,200, 1,300 years. Therefore, many temples, many inscriptions have been lost. So we can say. So first is the inscriptions are not any kind of an entitlement of a king. Why? There are many great kings in other civilizations. They have not issued any inscriptions or all like that. It's only during the Ashokan period he started a tradition of giving an orders, and he wanted to, because he established a vast kingdom and he wanted to have a better administrative control. So he issued certain rock edicts during his period. So this is how a tradition of issuing edicts, or even the tradition of inscriptions have been started. This is maybe the reason why we don't find any inscription prior to Ashoka. And studying Samudragupta, yes, we have a two copper plates of Samudragupta. We have two copper plates have been found. Though historians suddenly reject them because they are very early. I think Gupta era fifth year of Gupta era, and I think one more copper plate is dated in eighth Gupta era. So this may be the reason they just rejected, but actually there is a chronological problem. They have to address the first chronology to understand. So the two copper plates of Samudragupta have been found. So we cannot say, but many copper. I think that in North India we lost numerous sources of epigraphs during this last 200 years. So that's why there may be a less number of. But Ashoka, we find very rock inscriptions of the existed as it is. So, but it's not any way that every great king has to issue some inscriptions. It's not. We should not have that kind of a presumption.
Is there any effort to put it in the so that it could come in any academic syllabus, something like that, so that it should be spread throughout schools and all?
Yes. I think even before arrival of the colonial rulers, means before 18th century, Indians had a tradition of learning the history from Puranas and the various other sources. So history was almost the way Puranas have been updated. Why? Because from Mahabharata onwards, we have the chronological history of Brihadrata dynasty, then Pradyotas. Thereafter, we have the Shishunagas. Then we have Mauryan dynasty, then Shungas. So complete history of at least 3,000 years history from Mahabharata onwards has been given in Purana. Thereafter, we have various other historical texts, and we had our own chronological history existed. But during the colonial era, they just questioned few rationalities in the chronology because we are following some inconsistencies in the chronology, and we could not explain those inconsistencies to the colonial rulers. They simply rejected our traditional chronology. Then the so-called Indian historical research, the way the research has been unfolded during last 200 years, they wanted a particular narrative also for prolonging the colonial roots. Therefore, the history was written in a particular fashion and in a particular chronology that is being told. Now, we will be fighting against this kind of a chronology and the narrative. So it may take longer time because we have to unlearn the history it learned last 200 years. So we need to put a lot of hard work and then invite the historians for a debate, and then we have to take up the very hard facts to the government and put our the real how the true history has to be written, and based on the epigraphic and literary evidence. Archaeology can be supporting evidence. Archaeology can't provide any chronology because if we have a continuous history from Mahabharata onwards, therefore we should not look for any archaeological evidence for the dating of the dynastic history from Mahabharata to till date. We have a very even year-wise chronology is available. Now we have to reconcile based on the epigraphic evidence that I have done it. Yes, it will take time to convince, or even the problem is the what Sangam Talks is doing or any other YouTube channel, they are trying to put forth a true chronological history of India. So these are the efforts we have to do because there are no scholars in the government. We can't expect that government will listen to our Sangam Talks and then start revising the text. We have to collectively fight the false narrative first, but that also more academically and as well as the based on the hard facts. So certainly we will be able to change the textbooks in future, maybe next another 1 or 2 decades.
I had a question here regarding Shaka and what we refer to as Shakanta, right? Is this explicitly referred to as such in our literature, or is this a terminology that we are using? And the other thing is, I assume that Vikramaditya established the Shakanta, what we are calling the Shakanta, right?
Yes.
To commemorate defeat of Shakas. But what is the history of the early Shaka era? Thank you.
Yes. We need to first find out we get the Shakas and Vikramaditya reference into Jain literature. So there was a Gardabhilla, he was the king. He abducted the sister of a Kalakacharya, a Jain monk. So then Jain monk Kalakacharya wanted to take revenge with the Ujjain king Gardabhilla. So he crossed over the Indus River and met some Shaka warriors, and he asked them to help him, at least 1995 Shaka warriors. They came to Ujjain and they defeated Gardabhilla and they started ruling over Ujjain. So they ruled up to 4 years. Thereafter, Gardabhilla's son Vikramaditya, because their Shakas were, though they defeated Gardabhilla, became the rulers, but Indian society did not accept them because they were Mlechas. The Mlecha word is not because they are not civilized or uncivilized. Actually, they were not the Kshatriyas. They have to be descendant of either solar dynasty or lunar dynasty as per our tradition. So then we could not accept, as well as their way of living may be different from us also. So the Indian society could not accept them as the rulers. Then Gardabhilla's son Vikramaditya defeats them, and Vikramaditya drove them away from the Vijayanagara, Ujjain, and he founds an era that is called Vikramaditya era. This I have established. This has to be dated in 719 BC. Though those Shakas he drove away, they settled somewhere as a just individual warriors in Gujarat itself. But later, when Shalivahana ruled, these Shakas some way joined the Shalivahana, and then they defeated Vikramaditya. This is the literature. So then this is how the Ashaka era started a linkage with the Shalivahana. But in a after 135 years from Vikramaditya, Chashtana becomes the king of. He was the Shaka Kshatrap. He becomes the king of. He became the king of Ujjain. During that time, he started using his regnal years, and he, because they were following Surya Siddhanta and Yavana Siddhanta, that Yavana Jatakam was first time introduced in India. This is how a Chaitradi calendar was introduced, the 583 BC, and there was a great debate between Indian astronomers as well as the astronomers who are following the Yavana Jatakam. Then finally that led to introduction of Surya Siddhanta. Then we started following somewhere 2nd century BC, Varahamira and Kalidasa, that period, Surya Siddhanta. When we started following Surya Siddhanta, then we accepted 3101 as a Kali, but we needed a better epoch. That's why 78 AD has been selected by the Indian astronomers. And if you read the Bhaskaracharya Siddhanta Shiromani, he refers 3179 years elapsed, Shakan Ripasyante Kaler Vatsara. He uses a word, Shakan Ripasyante. At the end of Shaka, king, or we can assume or we can interpret as at the end of the Shaka era. He assumed that the old Shaka ended. Then we are beginning this era. But when he is giving his birth date, he is referring to Shakan Ripa Samaye. So he is referring to two different epochs. Absolutely. He is giving his birth date in the Siddhanta Shiromani, referring to Shakan Ripa Samaye. But when he is giving the how many years have been elapsed from 3101 BC to 78 AD, he is saying 3179 years have been elapsed, considering the Shakan Ripasyanta. Based on that, I established these two different names to differentiate. But later we simply referred Shaka, so generally we confused ourselves gradually. But there is a statement in the Al-Baruni's book. He is saying that Vikramaditya also, but actually Vikramaditya was fighting with the some similar Shakas in 957 BC, and he defeated them. And then he just, that was a victory year. Later that victory year translated into a Chaitradi Vikrama era to reconcile with the 78 AD epoch, because old Shaka and old Vikrama had the 135 years gap. In similar way, here also it may be a coincidence, there is a difference. That's why these two Vikrama eras, two Shaka eras came into existence. That Shakan Ripanta word I took from the Bhaskaracharya's shloka. Thank you.
I have a question from what you referred to the Vijayanagar Empire.
Yes.
You referred it at it is not referring to, you said that it is not actually 1300, 14th century,
Yes.
but books, my history books, which I am referring to, they state that after Alauddin Khilji's blow to India, the threat to the Hindu religion increased, and then in southern India, Mahadev Vidyaranya, who contributed to the cause of Vijayanagar Empire, and also with that the Muhammad bin Tughlaq's period also gave momentum to this movement of Vijayanagar Empire. Yes. So how can we relate it to the timings which you told about the Vijayanagar Empire?
Yes, yes. I know it's a biggest chronological problem in Indian history. It starts from the, we have to first establish the date of the Alexander also, because the during even Indo-Greek kings reigned in Afghanistan. So this chronological problem is generally we assume a date first AD as the sheet anchor of entire world chronology. So there is an assumption in the entire world historians, I think all academicians, they believe that first AD is the date of Jesus' birth. But there is no independently verifiable evidence to establish first AD as an historic epoch. I am not questioning historicity. The problem is the date of Hijra era, the epoch of Hijra or the date of Muhammad has been arrived with an assumption to that first AD is the Jesus birth. So what I have even challenged that this first AD does not deserve to be a sheet anchor of the world chronology. We need to first correct the Western chronology. There is a similar amount of chronological error in the Western chronology also. So that is the very important before we discuss about the Vijayanagara kingdom. As per my chronology, this framework as per Shaka era, Vijayanagara kingdom established around 660 AD to 675 AD during that period, not in the 14th century. But how we can correct this the period of this Muslim rulers and the Mughal eras, this everything. I have even give the complete analysis of that Aine Akbari and the Akbarnama, because Abul Fazl is a great astronomer. He gives 50 years history of Akbar, and every year he gives the exact timing of the sun's entry into Aries, because they were the Zoroastrian Muslims. They celebrated Nowruz more than the Ramzan. So the dating every year he gives the exact dating in solar calendar as well as in the lunar calendar. Those dates are verifiable, but I found that those dates can't be explained the way modern textbooks give the chronology. So there is a chronological error even in the medieval era. This can only be corrected if we first establish the exact epoch of Jesus' birth. Why? Because we have assumed first AD as the sheet anchor. So my challenge is to fix the chronology up to Augustus without referring to first AD, because Augustus were more ancient than the Jesus. So there is no historical evidence to establish first AD. Based on the first AD, you have established the date of Hijra era, and based on that Hijra and Muhammad date, then you are arriving the dates of Mughal and Muslim period. So there is a first we have to debate and establish, review the sheet anchors. So the sheet anchor first AD, what I am saying, it does not deserve. So there is a chronological error. I gave the numerous, not only 30 inscriptions I have given evidence that every inscription is referring to the date prior to 14th century. And a copper plate of Kudalimat is saying to Vidyaranya Vijayanagara in 1151 AD. And there are numerous inscriptions of 11th century referring to Vijayanagara kingdom. And there are 42 inscriptions refer to different kings. And there are much more evidence. And without rejecting these inscriptions, we can't establish the Vijayanagara date correctly. Apart from this, there are numerous Vanshavalis like Bhadoria Rajputs. They have a Vanshavali from 800 AD onwards. We reject that Vanshavali as a forgery. No, there is a chronological error. Once you correct the chronology, their Vanshavali is correct. So what I did, there are 550 or 560 princely states are there. We have simply ignored the Vanshavalis of those princely states. We have to establish the chronology of the Vanshavalis of those princely states. So in a true sense, we have been wrongly taught that Muslims and the Mughals were ruling for a 700. It's totally false. Entire South India was never under Muslim rule. Only few areas of Bahmani kingdom, and even Madurai Sultan were hardly 56 years. That's all. Tamil Nadu was never in Karnataka. Just Bahmani kingdom, maybe some 200, 300 year maximum, or some way the Nizam in the Hyderabad in a particular pocket. But 90% of South India was free from the Mughal rule, and even North also, they were only few. So even before arrival of the Britishers, Indians already defeated the Muslim rulers, and out of 550, these princely states have not been created by the Britishers. These states existed before Britishers' arrival. It means out of 550, more than 500 are only Hindu kingdoms. So this false narrative has been established due to false chronology. So that's why there is I know it's a biggest challenge to reconcile the world chronology, because Indian chronology is linked with the other, because the Buddha Nirvana date is very, very important, because the entire Sri Lankan chronology is linked to Buddha Nirvana. Now Sri Lankan history is linked with the Tamil history. Then Sri Lankan Burmese history also linked with it. Then Tibetan history, because our own many Buddhist monks visited Tibet, so there is a link between the Tibet. Then once we go to Tibet, Tibet is linked with the China. Once you enter into China, then China is linked with the Persian history. So we need to reconcile the entire world chronology if we are going to revise the Buddha's. That's why this 660-year error is also there in the Vijayanagara. I know it is very, very surprising. How can we correct the even Muslim chronology? For that purpose, what I'm saying, don't jump into the medieval era. You just first establish how first aid is historical. Simple. You find out the answer, you will find the answer for the Vijayanagara also. To first review why we should consider first AD as a historic epoch or sheet anchor for entire world chronology. That has no evidence to establish first AD as a sheet.
My question is about the so-called Indus script. That why we are not able to decipher the script yet. The iconography associated with the script have been deciphered. Like earlier, Mr. Bhupendraji has talked about the scales, but why we are not able to decipher the script yet? Like, what would be the context or the content in the script, or what is your take on it?
Yes. Any script, if you want to decipher it, either the language should be known to you, because we could decipher the Brahmi script because the Prakrit language and Sanskrit language known to us. Okay. And we must know first what language has been used. Let us assume that probably an older Prakrit has been used already. But the problem is the script, the Indus script is not a phonetic script, because phonetic script have a limited vowels and limited consonants, and you will use the matra. So there are symbols are always will be limited, maybe 50, 60, 70, not more than that. Since the Indus script has at least 200 or 150 symbols, it's a logosyllabic script. So how you can decipher it? So it is a Herculean, it is a near to impossible without finding a bilingual language. Even the Egyptian script was deciphered once they got the bilingual inscriptions. So I don't know whether if we can get a Brahmi script and the Indus script, if we can get a bilingual inscription, then we can verify each other. What, which symbol denotes what kind of a symbol or oval or consonant, because that is the Herculean task. Many people just speculate and come out of some kind of a theories, but that may not convince the academicians. This is the reason till date the Indus script is because it's not a phonetic script. This is the reason we are not able to decipher till date. Let us hope if we may get any bilingual inscription, then we may succeed convincing the world academicians.
ये मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि जैसे कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम को डिस्ट्रॉय करने में टीबी मैकॉले का हाथ है, और हमारे जो ग्रंथ वगैरह एडिट करने में मैक्स मूलर का हाथ है, तो ये हिस्ट्री को डिस्ट्रॉय करने में और ये डेटिंग का जो आप बता रहे हैं, इसको चेंज करने में किस व्यक्ति का मूलतः हाथ है, और ये कहाँ से षड्यंत्र चालू हुआ? थोड़ा सा मैं इसके बारे में बेसिक
नहीं, ये है ना कि मैंने आपको सीधा बताया था, 1984 में सर विलियम जोन्स हैं जिन्होंने एशियाटिक सोसाइटी ऑफ बंगाल एक बनाया था उन्होंने, एंड दिस ब्रिटिशर्स, ये जो ब्रिटिशर्स आए तो दे वर फैसिनेटेड अबाउट अलेक्जेंडर, उनको क्योंकि उनके लिए अलेक्जेंडर बहुत बड़ा हीरो था, क्योंकि उसने पूरा वर्ल्ड उसने कॉन्क्वेर किया था। एक अगर आप भारतीय संस्कृति में देखें, हमें कभी किसी कॉन्क्वेरर राजा को हमने महान नहीं बनाया, जिसने जनता के लिए त्याग किया। राम इसलिए महान है क्योंकि उन्होंने बहुत कुछ त्याग किया लोगों को। ऐसे जो महान व्यक्ति त्याग पुरुष होते हैं भारत में, जबकि वेस्ट के लिए वो एक तरीके से कॉन्करर्स थे, तो दे वर लुकिंग एट द डिटेल्स ऑफ द अलेक्जेंडर एंड दे वांटेड टू एस्टैब्लिश द डेट ऑफ सैंड्रोकोटस, क्योंकि ग्रीक हिस्टोरियन एक सैंड्रोकोटस नाम के एक इंडियन राजा के बारे में लिखते हैं। तो वो एस्टैब्लिश करने के लिए जब इन्होंने स्टार्ट किया, then they wanted to explore the true chronology. Then they have questioned our Sanskrit scholars or historians, whoever they, on what basis you date Vikramaditya and Varahamihira Kalidasa in 1st century BC, but Varahamihira and Kalidasa, even Varahamihira refers to Shakaira. In the Panchasiddhantika में वो शकाइरा 427 को रिफर करते हैं। If you add 78 तो 505, so how you can date Varahamihira before 505 AD? तो हमारे पास कोई आंसर नहीं था, क्योंकि हम भूल चुके थे कि कोई एंशिएंट शकाइरा था। तो हमारे यहाँ भी कुछ गलतियां हुई कि हम कुछ परंपरा से भटक गए थे। तो इस क्रोनोलॉजिकल एरर्स को जब हम उनको एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर पाए, देन दे थॉट दैट वी विल करेक्ट द क्रोनोलॉजी। तो क्रोनोलॉजी में कोई षड्यंत्र नहीं हुआ, उन्होंने कुछ जो गलतियां हुई उनको सुधार सकते थे, वो उन्होंने किया नहीं। एक सेकेंड, दे हैड न्यूमरस एविडेंसेस टू एस्टैब्लिश दैट इंडियन एंटिक्विटी गोज बैक मच मोर, लेकिन वो एक्सेप्ट नहीं करना चाह रहे थे। मैं जिसको रूल करता हूं वो मेरे से महान लोग थे। तो जनरली अ रूलर विल नेवर एक्सेप्ट दैट। सेकेंड, वो कॉलोनियल इरा को जितना लंबा हो सके वो चाहते थे। तीसरा, क्रिश्चियन मिशनरीज को हेल्प करना चाहते थे। तो इसीलिए हिस्ट्री के नरेटिव को उन्होंने हमेशा ऐसे रखा ताकि हिंदू जो भी भारतीय थे उनके अंदर भारत के प्रति एक स्वाभिमान और एक गर्व ना हो, क्योंकि एक स्वाभिमानी देश पर शासन करना असंभव काम होता है। तो वो ये चाहते थे कि भारतीयों में अपने देश के प्रति, अपने इतिहास के प्रति स्वाभिमान या गर्व ना हो, इसलिए उन्होंने पूरे नरेटिव को इस तरीके से डिस्टॉर्ट किया। लेकिन समस्या ये हुई, उन्होंने कॉलोनियल रूल को एक ऐसे तंत्र को हैंड ओवर करके चले गए, वो उन्हीं के लेगेसी को आज तक बढ़ाता रहा। अब हमें इसको अब ठीक करना है, तो उसी प्रयास में बहुत सारे लोग लगे हैं। आशा करते हैं कभी होगा जरूर।